Hey everyone, it is Elyse Wagner, your kitchen shrink, and you're watching ETV, the place to be to create delicious, fab health, food, attitude, and body. And I've got a cue for you this Wednesday. So my question is, what do you think of? Maybe it's a thought or maybe it's a feeling that comes up when you hear the word fat or weight. Is it a judgment? Is it something negative? So if it is, you're going to love today's episode of ETV because we've got a special guest, Dr. Linda Bacon. She is the co-author of Health at Every Size, as well as her new book, Body Respect. And this is an amazing book. But what we're going to talk about in today's interview is we are going to bust 5 weight myths. You do not want to miss this episode. It is epic. So I'll see you over in the interview. Dr. Linda Bacon is an internationally recognized authority on topics related to nutrition, weight, and health. She's a nutrition professor and researcher and holds graduate degrees in physiology, psychology, and exercise metabolism with a specialty in nutrition. She's conducted multiple federally funded studies on diet and health and is well published in many of the top scientific journals. Her work is regularly quoted in national and international publications, with recent appearances in the New York Times, London Sunday Times, ABC Nightly News with Diane Sawyer, Good Morning America, and magazines including Prevention, Glamour, Cooking Light, Newsweek, Fitness Magazine, and National Geographic. Dr. Bacon is the author of Health at Every Size and the global movement HAZE, as well as her newest book, Body Respect: What Conventional Health Books Get Wrong, Leave Out, or Just Fail to Understand, which is a crash course in what you need to know about bodies and health. We are here with Dr. Linda Bacon of the Health at Every Size movement, and she just has written a beautiful new book called Body Respect. I just got it in the mail a couple days ago, and I have been reading it, and I really can't put it down. I think part of that is because I resonate so much with the information in it and the stories that are in it. And so we are going to talk about first of all, this book is full of amazing information, but the one thing that we are going to talk about is, and I'm sure we could talk for days about this, but we are going to address the 5 myths of weight, right? So before we get started, I'd really like to ask you, how you got started in this entire field, because as I was reading, you share little bits and pieces of your story throughout, and I personally was able to really connect with those. But if you could just share a little brief, how you got involved in this field.
Sure. I know, I always like to pretend that I came to this field because I care about people. I'm such a compassionate person. But the truth is, that's not really what's behind it. The truth was that I was out to save myself. Weight was always such a painful issue for me, and I struggled so much. Mm-hmm. And it was my own struggles with weight and trying to figure out how to come to a more comfortable space that led me on this whole journey of self-discovery. And in the process, I learned that much of the information that's out there about weight is not based on solid science, mm-hmm. and is not going to support people in getting to a more comfortable and healthier place in their bodies. Mm-hmm. And I have multidisciplinary education. In fact, I'm probably one of the most well-educated people in the field with 3 graduate degrees behind me, all in different aspects of weight science. Yeah. And what I found in every single field that I studied was that there's a huge disconnect from mm-hmm. what we know in science and in how people are to what gets out to the general public and what gets commonly believed. Mm-hmm. And so in the process of saving myself, I should say that I did come to a much more comfortable place of being able to enjoy my body and settling into a weight that feels right and good for me. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I learned a lot that I want to share with others and help to bust some of those myths and support others in being able to celebrate bodies.
Yes.
It's just such a shame now mm-hmm. that something like food, which, food is amazing. It's our reward. Amazing. Like, we're biologically and evolutionarily set up to mm-hmm. enjoy food so that we eat and, get reward from it. Mm-hmm. And that preserves our species. But yet, what's happened today is that food is just a source of fear for people. And they can't enjoy that. And it just saddens me that we can't appreciate our bodies, enjoy food, and all of the social connection that could come from those two.
Yeah.
So I'm on a mission right now to help to restore body respect.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And I stand behind it 150%, if not 200%. It's sad what's going on as far as, the media, and apologize for the connection that we have. It's a little choppy, or so apologize for those who are listening. But the outside influencer, I call it nutrition noise. I don't know what you call it, but it's all these, you gotta look this way, or eat this, or don't eat that. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers between, there is the science, and we're going to get to this one myth in a second about the science of things. And you touch upon this. I tend to call it like body wisdom, what are, really getting in tune with ourselves. But yeah, this disconnect between what we're hearing even from other health experts as well, and being really confused about all this information. And then when you're going to go into some of these myths, and I just want to kind of preface these myths to people before we go into them, that these may be things that people haven't heard, or maybe they've heard, but they've just disregarded because the noise outside is so much louder. And that's all it is. I think it's just the volume. It's not necessarily, and so, and this is just a side note, and I'll ask you this afterwards, so let's just keep this in mind. But I think a couple key questions that we can be asking ourselves when we hear certain things. So let's address that after the myths. But let's go ahead and dive into myth number 1. And there are 7 myths in this book. It's Body Respect, and it's not out yet, so we'll talk about when it comes out, but very soon it's coming out. And so the first myth that Linda's gonna bust for us is fatness leads to decreased longevity.
Right. Well, I was shocked when I started to do the research on this, because we hear in the news on a daily basis that you're going to die earlier if you're heavier. And I was amazed when I went to the research. There have actually been probably about 45 epidemiologic studies that have been done to date that have looked at longevity and weight. And all but a handful of them actually show that people that are in the overweight category live longest. And people that are in the mild and moderate categories of obesity, where most of the population is, live at least as long as people in that category that we call normal and deem advisable.
Right.
So it's a real shock to realize that we're not reporting the real data that's out there. And I find it interesting too to figure out how to talk about this, because why would a listener want to believe me when every day they read in the papers something really quite different from that? And I think that becomes quite a challenge then for people to try to figure out, well, I'm supposed to be trusting these experts that are studying in the field, and how do I know really who to trust?
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't have an easy answer to that. I can suggest that you just look at the data, which is what I provide in the book, and I give peer-reviewed references so people can follow up on it. But I would imagine that a better idea would be that they could probably see that they have a lot of friends that are in that category called obese that are healthy and living long lives, and that it doesn't really match up with experience, right?
Yeah.
But I should say, because I know that you're going to now ask about myth 2, right? And I have a very different suggestion for your audience around myth 2.
Okay.
Myth 2 is not about longevity. Myth 2 is about disease, right? And what we see is that it is true that if you look around at your friends, you're probably going to find that heavier people are more likely to have certain diseases than thinner people, right? Type 2 diabetes is a classic example.
Right.
About 80% of the people that have type 2 diabetes are in the heavier category than people that don't, right? And so then it would be really easy to leap to the assumption, which most people do, that, well, let's blame it on weight. But when you start to unpick the data around that, you could look at every single one of the studies that is blaming it on weight. What you could do is you could ask other questions of the exact same data. And when you ask other questions, what you'd find is, oh, well, not only is type 2 diabetes more prevalent among heavier people, but hey, it's also more prevalent among people who are economically disadvantaged.
Right.
And then, and you find, in fact, that it tracks much, much more closely to social status than it does to weight. And so when you start to look at those answers, you can then see, wow, well, maybe there's other pathways then. Maybe there's some way that economic disadvantage leads to type 2 diabetes. And then you can figure out that, yeah, there are a lot of ways. Like, for example, just the stress of managing when you meet up with discrimination.
Absolutely.
That wreaks havoc on your body and sets you up for all of those diseases that we then blame on obesity. So just because we see obesity more commonly among heavier people, that doesn't mean that we can blame it on weight.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too. I'm watching my vocabulary, and I don't usually use the word obesity. And I'm surprised to hear myself say that, because I want to get everybody out of the habit of using that term. Especially now that the American Medical Association has officially deemed obesity a disease. Because they've defined it as a medical category, but it's not. All it is a relationship between somebody's weight and height. And what we know is that there are plenty of people that live long, disease-free lives in that obese category. So obesity itself is not medically problematic. So I just like to acknowledge the fact that people live in heavier bodies or fatter bodies as opposed to calling them obese. But anyway, to get back to that big point, what we know is that while it is true that there are many diseases that are more common among heavier people, what we can also do is we can unpick the research and try to ask questions about why that's true. When we do, we realize that weight actually plays very little role in most of it, and that it's things like social status and, to a lesser extent, eating behaviors and activity behaviors that play a role. And again, I think I'm already getting at yet another myth in all of this, because I do know that when people talk about weight, the first thing they think about is eating. The second thing is probably activity. Right?
Those two factors, go hand in hand. What is your eating or your diet like? What is it? Which I am also very conscious of the words that I say, and diet is, and I hate that word. I will just say it. It has the word die in it. I like eating lifestyle, but so diet and activity. And in your book, you address, and there's so many other factors that are involved. It's not just those two things.
Right. And while our behaviors do play some extent in weight and some extent in disease, what we also know is, again, those social factors play a much, much larger role, and that we don't really have the kind of control that we think we do over our weight. And when we start to unpick this, we realize that if we really want to do something about those diseases that we tend to blame on obesity, if we can instead put our efforts, or if we could focus our efforts on making this a safer place for everybody to just kind of enjoy and respect their bodies, stop the weight stigmatization, work towards supporting people so that it's easier for everybody to make good health choices, that once we start to address all of those social justice issues, then we're going to see the health problems are going to recede.
Freedom. It's like an emotional and physical release, right?
Right.
So, I think that can be a lot for, just people coming to this movement and hearing this, but it's a opening, right? It's a way to start. And I think,
I know. It's like everybody usually comes to us as health practitioners to find out what they're supposed to eat and, to get all the recommendations. What I always like to do is suggest to people that you're always going to do better if you start from coming to a place of just accepting the body that you're living in rather than feeling like there's something wrong with you. You know, that's never going to be a good basis to make change. And then the next step is, well, let's figure out how to treat this body well and take good care of ourselves.
Yeah, which is something that I think a lot of us, even as practitioners, can benefit from. I mean, I think self-care is just such a huge piece. And you mentioned something in the book. It's from moving from a space of, I can't remember exactly what you said, something to self-care. And it was, you know, that's huge, because a lot of us are not necessarily starting at that point of self-care. We're really starting at the point of, you know, calories or diet, and we're still in this mindset and belief system, I think, that, you know, it is all about the weight or the calories, and it's really not. It's really not. When we're talking about health as a whole thing and looking at all the different aspects of it. So,
and in fact, it's also not true that those things play a large role in weight, which I know is also a pretty hard thing for people to understand, given how we get such different cultural messages. Yeah. But in fact, we've never proven that if people try to control their calories and eat less, that they're going to weigh less in the long run.
Right.
And in fact, all of the research seems to indicate that people who try to control their intake actually are more likely to gain weight over time, whereas the people who let go of thinking about it and just rely more on attuned eating or responding to their body signals do a much better job at maintaining weight stability and, you know, as opposed to gaining weight. So it's ironic that when you give up control, you gain control.
It's a nice relationship, right? I think that is so true, and I've experienced in my own personal life, coming from my own personal struggles and wanting to figure it out and essentially make myself better first. And that was one of the struggles, or one of the things that I really had to let go of, was this control. And it was such a freeing experience to have, to move into it, I should say, because it just doesn't happen overnight, right? You got to kind of lean into it, I say, or move into this space of acceptance and just respect. And it's a journey, which is kind of the beautiful aspect of it too. So, and so, okay, well, let's go to the next myth. So far, let's just recap really fast. We've talked about, you know, fatness. The myth is fatness leads to decreased longevity, which is not true. And BMI, we touched on for a second, is that, you know, is not a valuable and accurate health measure. And I know a lot of doctors and other health practitioners use this measure, and it's not necessarily their choice. They've got some outside factors kind of saying, this is the information that you need to take, right, at a certain appointment. So, and then we talked about fat plays a substantial role in causing disease, which is not true. And so the next myth that I would like you to debunk is that, and we talked about exercise and dietary restriction are not effective weight loss techniques, which I think a lot of people, you know, that's kind of a shocker. You know, what's interesting, just a side note, the more people I talk to, the more I feel like they know that. They have like a knowing. They know that doesn't work. You know, and part of me thinks, well, why do we keep going? Why do so many people keep going back to that model, right? And is it the usability of it? I mean, what are your thoughts on that, just out of curiosity?
Well, I think it's scary to trust ourselves. You know, we're taught all the time that we need to control ourselves. We need to trust experts to tell us what to do. Yeah. And the idea of trusting ourselves can be really scary. And in fact, it was really interesting to me when I started to study this stuff in laboratories. And in order for me to get permission from the U.S. government to do research on human subjects, you have to show that it's ethical, right? And at first, people, when I presented this to an ethics committee, they said, oh no, if you tell people to trust themselves, they're just going to eat out of control all the time, and this is going to be really dangerous, and we're concerned that this is unethical work to be doing.
Wow.
And the only way we could convince them was to just show them that, first off, previous research had shown that that's not the case, right? But they didn't care so much about that because bias was so important to them, you know? And, because they were so biased to believe it that they didn't trust the research, right? So eventually what we just did was to say, well, I know this is going to make it into a much more expensive study and more difficult to do, but we're just going to follow them really closely, and we'll keep stopping the study to test them to make sure that they're not eating out of control and that your concerns aren't founded. And we'll stop the study immediately if we see that happening. So it turned into a much more expensive study to do, but we found that it just wasn't true. That the more people settled into this, they found that they could trust themselves, and it was such a relief to them to give up that control and to just relax around food. And that to them was one of the biggest benefits of the study, was the fact that food wasn't conflicted for them anymore. It was just fun. They could appreciate it, and at the same time, they were making better choices because of it. So that was pretty amazing to show.
That is amazing. That's on your site as well, right?
You'll find that in my first book. I tell that whole story. My first book was called Health at Every Size, The Surprising Truth About Your Weight. And it's a good self-help manual and kind of shows the research that's been done in how to implement this.
Yeah, it's awesome. I read it. I love it. I recommend it to my clients. It's got a lot of invaluable information. So let's get to the last myth, which is really, this is really intriguing to me coming, we both come from, evidence-based, education and things like that where, a lot of it is the clout, if you will, is based on research. And one of the myths is that you have in the book is science is value-free. And I can agree with that. I think that can be, a little difficult, but to balance. And so I'm curious what the myth is behind that.
Sure. Well, there's so many different ways to give you examples about this. And how about if I provide you with one that's not in the book so we can get some fun backstory here?
Okay.
I'll tie it to your earlier question about BMI so that we can talk a little bit about how it's not a valuable health indicator. I remember that when I was doing my PhD in physiology and I was studying these issues, the U.S. government raised the BMI standards during that time.
Okay.
And they lowered the BMI standards, and basically they were saying that people were fat at a much lower weight than they had been previously.
Okay.
And I was just shocked that this happened because I was studying all of the research at that time, and the research was showing, no, we don't see any kind of disease risks until much higher. You should raise them. So I asked somebody who was on the panel, the National Institute of Health panel, that helped to decide on these guidelines. What was behind it? And she laughed at me and said, basically, I knew this question was going to come to me eventually. And the reason I had easy access to her was because she was my PhD advisor at the time. She said, well, I know you're working on this for your PhD right now, so why don't you just show me, pretend you were on the committee in my stead, you wrote the guide, you had to make a recommendation. What research would you look at? What conclusions would you come up with? I did that, handed it in to her, and she said, this is brilliant, Linda. You're ready for your PhD now. And I said, but I don't get it. It's the exact opposite of what you did. And she said, oh, yeah, we found the same results you did, but we got so much pressure to meet up with what the international community is doing that we just decided to go the other direction. So the whole idea of BMI, it's not based on science. This is just politics. Right? And if you want to know why the international community is doing it, well, you could trace it back and you could find out that the World Health Organization got their recommendations from the International Obesity Task Force, which at the time was funded by the pharmaceutical companies. And the two biggest funders were the two companies that had the only weight loss drugs on the market at the time. So in other words, today's BMI standards are political moves that were written by the pharmaceutical industry, but yet they're standard practice in healthcare today. Mm-hmm. So it tells us a lot about what's going on behind all of these recommendations and how we should be skeptical when we hear things from the experts.
Absolutely. Well, a couple things come up, right, that I want to address is that when people start hearing this, like when I was reading some of that in the book, and then when you're talking about it, for me, it brings up a little bit of anger and probably some, wow, that this is really affecting a lot of people on multiple different levels. And so, for people who are going to be watching this, and it's going to be bringing up questions and feelings for them, right? And for those people who are not really, still don't have the skills to cope with those feelings, which could then, so how maybe what is one or two, takeaway steps that after we, are digging into this, the book and the myths a little bit more, and, how can we take away and start to implement some of these myths, right, into our everyday life and be open, I think, about the experience. I think it's definitely okay to have these feelings and to be, upset about it. We're basically been lied to, right? And so then that can create some more distrust. So what are your thoughts on,
Well, my suggestion would be that we always have to start from a base of self-acceptance. Mm-hmm. And acceptance doesn't necessarily mean that you have to love everything about yourself. I mean, that would be wonderful, but you're not going to get there, right? And you're going to go back and forth all the time.
Right.
But the first thing is to try to lighten up on all those outside messages and recognize that regardless of what is out there in the media, what your doctor is telling you, you're okay just the way you are. And that's
I love that. I think people should just say that all right now, because I say that to myself all the time.
Right.
We were just talking before about the positive self-talk, and it really is powerful to just say something like that and it's a relief.
Right. And I should also say that that doesn't mean that you don't want to change things, right? And it doesn't mean that you think you're gorgeous when you look in the mirror. But what it does mean is that you can accept that this is who you are in the moment, and be kind to whoever that is. Right?
Yeah.
And with that base, then, you're more likely to be able to make change.
Yeah, I agree with you for your choices and your decisions based on, is this going to be kind to my body, right?
Right. So it doesn't mean that you have to think, oh, my body is perfect the way it is, right? Because you that's going to be a challenging one, right? But you can accept, this is my body that I'm living in, right? So let me live in it. Let me embrace it. And it's amazing the things that can flow from that base.
Yeah.
So throw out all those recommendations that you get from your doctor about what you're supposed to do and what you're supposed to look like and weigh. And instead, just start from the fact that this is what I have to work with. Now, how do I nourish it best? And how do I take care of myself best?
Yeah, and to reference your first book, you give a lot of really great examples on how to do that, even from taking a shower or from just walking and acknowledging the feet that you have and the legs that you have and your muscles. And that in and of itself is a really powerful thing. And it's about experimenting and experiencing all these things. So I love all of the busting of the myths and all of that stuff, because health, what we're talking about, and just our bodies in general, is so much more than numbers and weight and calories. So, yeah.
Can I jam in another comment before?
Yes, you can.
Okay, good. And I know too that so many people feel like, but what do I eat? And within this framework, it becomes a lot easier to figure out what to eat. So let's think about how most nutritionists are these days telling us that we're supposed to eat more fiber. And there is science behind that, right? That it does help people improve their health. But you know what? You don't need a nutritionist to tell you, because it's really easy to figure it out from your lived experience. People that don't get enough fiber in their diet are constipated a lot. They've got energy ups and downs all the time, right? So when you're paying attention to all the messages your body gets, you find that when you're eating foods that are higher in fiber, you feel better for it.
Yeah.
And that's what helps you to choose higher fiber foods, as opposed to the recommendation, eat high fiber. So the more you connect with your body will teach you just what it needs to help you to feel great. And I think that healthcare practitioners can help us to bridge our personal experience with nutritional facts, right? But the idea is that it's always got to come back to someone's lived experience if they're going to be making changes. So the individual is always the best expert of what their body needs.
That is, yeah, I 100% agree. That's what I tell people and my clients, that they have all the right ingredients to create delicious health success. They really do. And I think sometimes, instead of telling people what to eat and how to eat, and that's a lot of clients, come and say that to me, and I bring it back to them, and that it is so much more empowering that way. And we talk about the feelings and the choices and decisions that come from that. We all know pretty much what we should be eating, right? It's some of the barriers to that, and I think that's really where some change can be made with the practitioners working with us people on health behavior change, and all of that, all the stuff that kind of comes up with that as well. So, and then let's talk about when your book is coming out, and it's coming out really soon.
Within days. It comes out September 2nd. So I'm very, very excited about it. And I really hope that it's going to support people in feeling better about themselves, support health practitioners in figuring out how to support their clients. And I'd love to see it change the whole public health landscape as well.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
This whole public health campaign right now that's anti-obesity and teaching people about dieting is just so painful for so many of us. And I really just want us to have a more hopeful message of just respecting bodies and, the transformation in our world that could come from that, not just in health, but when we think about gender inequity and, just how hard it is for people to just kind of own their bodies. It can help us move us more towards equality and appreciation on so many different levels. So I'm really excited to see this message get out more to the general public.
I am too. I'm super excited about it. And there is going to be a big blogging kind of tour that goes along with this, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Starting September 15th, you'll see a lot of different blogs. I'll be touring different blogs every day to give little messages of inspiration.
That's going to be fantastic. So, and we can get the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and any major bookstore?
Places.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing your message and your movement. And I, for one, am signed up at the Health at Every Size. If you go, we'll give the link below. And so if this interests you and you're really on board with this, I really encourage you to go to the website, and we'll have that link, and sign up, and you can be a part of this movement, and along with thousands of other people all around the country and all around the world, right?
Thanks, Elyse.
Yes, you're absolutely welcome.
Spread the love.
Spread the love. So now Dr. Bacon and I would love to hear from you. Which one of these myths surprised you the most? Leave your comments below. And for even more juicy insights from me that I only serve up in my email updates, get your sweet buns on over to mykitchenshrink.com and sign up for weekly health videos, whole foods recipes, and irresistible inspiration. Thank you so much for reading and watching and participating We'll see you next time on ETV. Fab Camp is coming soon. Make sure to click the link below to sign up for updates so you'll be notified exactly when enrollment opens. We are going to bust 5 weight myths with oh Lord. Okay. What? That's gonna go on a blooper. What are your thoughts on fat? When I say the word fat, what comes up for you? When I say the word weight and fat, what comes up to you? We're gonna bust 5 myths. 5 weight myths today with Dr. Linda Bacon.